Hey there, Braga here, and today on Pixel Refresh Podcast, I have Jacqueline Joy with me. Now, Jacqueline and I have worked together for, I don't know, 4, 5 years, somewhere in there. Um, and Jacqueline's worn many hats. UI, she's done specifically managing our channels and community management, and now she is the designer, like a level designer and that kind of designer at Massive
Yeah.
Damage.
Content
Content
designer,
designer. So
world builder.
that's got to be like
Oh
some
my
transition. Like those are
God.
really different hats.
Yeah, well, like I've always been, well, world building and design has always been kind of my realm. So like it just felt like a very natural transition for me. Because like community management, it's like you're kind of building a little world with your community as well. So I found a lot of the skills transferable.
Well, I mean, yeah. Uh, okay, it's kind of like the core of what drives these things is similar. Like you're
Mhm.
driven by the love of games, right? And then you're driven
Yeah.
by what you want to do in games. And oftentimes you start in the industry in a position, but it's not where you want to get into. You just want to get into the industry and then you kind of move through trying to
Yeah,
find
just
your
feeling it
footing.
out. Yeah.
Yeah. Was that really what it was like for you or?
Yeah, because like at my previous studio, I think I started off actually as a game design like intern, and like, it was like a very small team. So like again, we all wore multiple hats, and then we didn't have anyone on social media. So they were like, "Oh, do you know how to do social media?" I'm like, "I could try," and then that just kind of became my thing.
Social media is like my bane. It's
Yeah,
like I know I need to do it, and I'm successful for how terrible I am at it. So
it's the content. You like push out good content.
it
So
pays off. Like it's definitely worth doing, but it's annoying. And I would prefer if I had one part of everything I do that I could just give to someone else, it would probably be that. I'd be like,
are
take
you
the
like nudging me? Is this
no,
like
no,
a
no, no, no,
threat?
no. It's not your responsibility. It's not your
I mean,
responsibility.
a
You,
little bit.
you don't know what I'm going to be doing. It's like, Brian, are you going to be drawing some random promotion for some random game maybe? I don't know.
Oh.
That's what I would typically do. Just find something I love and I'm feeling inspired. It's usually the worst thing because when I do one of those images, I'm sitting on the couch and I'm thinking it'd be like my one free night and I'd be like, should I play a game? And then a stupid image comes in my head and I'm like, dang it, I gotta make that image. And then I'm
New
like,
brain.
oh, it's like there. And then I'm just like, fine. And I have to put the image somewhere. So then
Oh, and how long does it usually like take you, like each
I don't
piece?
know. It depends. The funny thing is like I was looking at this today too, which is kind of interesting. Is the payoff is so uneven.
Mm.
Um, it's like you can spend like 2.5 hours on a piece and it does crazy well, and you can spend like 5 nights on a piece and it does okay. Or it's like it's funny because if you look at my recent Twitter history, I've done I don't know if it's 4 or 5 Metroid Dread tweets, which is too much. You could tell I love Metroid a little bit too much.
It's a little too much.
Just a little too much. But the one that I spent the most work on did the worst out of the set. The ones that the one with Samus on the elevator took me actually it was mostly one night. It was like maybe 2 or 3 hours, and then the one with Samus and like the door and that took me like 2 nights. But the one with like the crazy scene there where Samus is running and then it's chasing and there's all of these areas and it's set up in Unity, that took like 6 nights and it did the worst
Oh
out
my
of all of
God.
them. So it
Oh
was like the one that
no.
wasn't worth spending all that much time on, but it's like, it's funny because I was looking at Snake Pixel, the
Mhm.
guy who did Owlboy, phenomenal pixel artist, and he spent all of this time doing this Mega Man homage, and it was you could tell it's a ton of work looking at it, and it did worse than a lot of his other stuff that he just does like a sketch on the fly, and it's like I know you spent months on that one pick, and then you spent like a couple hours on this other one, and it's like the payoff is so uneven, so it's hard to tell
I
with
know
social
that feeling.
media. It's
Yeah,
really hard, right? It's like
it
you
is.
might care about making something, and then the other part is that you gradually start catering what you want to make to your audience. Sometimes a good thing, sometimes a bad
Mhm.
thing. There's give and take with that, where it's
Yeah.
like,
Well, there needs to be a balance, I think.
well, it can push you to get better, but it can also
Mhm.
push you too narrow, right? Because then
Yeah.
it can push
Mhm.
your focus so narrow that you're not making things that might work better for games or for other things. It's just to get that kind of splash response. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? It's like I think you and I, the thing that's always kind of driven us in common is that we have like kind of games in our heart that we want to make, and what's important to us in games. And it's like I think this is something that all gamers experience, but at some point in time, they'll be told that their favorite genre is dying for some reason or other. It'd be like, oh, story-based games are dead. And you're like, shut up. I love story-based games. Don't tell me they're dead. I don't want you to stop making them. Like, or JRPGs are dead. That was going around for like
Yeah.
5 or 10 years. Or Nintendo should just
Mhm.
be bought by another company. It's like, stop saying things about things I love.
Stop it.
Stop it.
Yeah.
Yeah, cover. So, I mean, I know you care a lot about, like, we wanted to get specifically in this talk into story and games and how important it is and the games that impacted us. So,
Yeah.
like, do you have any specific examples that come to mind right away?
When we say like game narrative, like thinking about it, I was thinking about this earlier, but like world building is actually a little bit different from storytelling. And
Mm,
while I think they both can be important, I think that world building for me, like you can have a game that has like really good world building
yeah.
and it adds on to storytelling. But like I think when people say storytelling, they think of people having dialogues with each other, having like a fleshed out, like, oh, hey, Joe, what did you do today, or whatever. But like that's not really what storytelling is about. It's more about like I think trying to convey a emotion and like the best way to tell it through gameplay or
I
mechanics.
think you can do it through any of those avenues. I think that
Hmm.
what storytelling is kind of about is about making your world tangible. And there's
Yeah.
a lot of different paths to that. You can do that
Hmm.
through like just building lore into your world.
Hmm.
You can do it through outright narrative and people
Yeah.
talking about it. You can do it through relationships between characters. You can do it
Hmm.
through music and setting alone, right?
Yeah.
There are paths to it that some of them
Hmm.
are harder to pull off than others, right?
Yeah.
And usually the most kind of like dreamlike experiences games can be, and the most immersive ones typically are succeeding at several of them simultaneously.
I agree. And
Like
like even like I admit like for storytelling like I actually skip through all dialogue. I don't like listen to what well if there's too much dialogue I just kind of skip through it.
it
So for
depends on the
me like
game for me. Like for me, it's
really
how I
oh.
approach the game. There are
Hmm.
games that I'll just constantly skip all the dialogue, and there are games
Hmm.
that if they grab me in the first like hour or two, I'll sit and I'll read
Hmm.
through every bit of dialogue and everything on that game.
Hmm.
But it really depends on the game itself and whether it actually succeeds at that. It's
Hmm.
like whether it's like what's a game that I did that with? I think the very first time I played Nier did that for me, where
Oh.
I had bought it. Uh, it was a used copy at Blockbuster for like 9.99 or 10.99, and then my friend Evan was staying with us for like 3 or 4 days, and I literally just walked to my shelf and I was like, "Play this," and I pushed it on him, and I didn't even know why. And it had been sitting on my shelf for like half a year at that point, and then we just played through like half of them were like, oh my gosh, the story was so amazing and it like blew us away. But it was like when we were playing it, it's like that feel it gave it initially. I wasn't intending to care about it. So I was going into it, I'm like, whatever, we were just talking, joking, but then the atmosphere and the way that it presented itself kind of just crept in on you in a way that you start paying attention. And sometimes games have to do that before they can grab you, especially if they're unknown, whether they can actually deliver that front. But
Mhm.
um, yeah, like I'm guilty of skipping cutscenes in games. I've been tempted to do it in Tales of Arise as I play, but that's also partially because I've just finished reading the Full Metal Alchemist manga, and
Oh.
I've read through half of Berserk in the last like month, and the character development in that is so much better than Tales of Arise that it makes Tales of Arise pretty painful to play.
Is that what you're playing right now? Tales of
It
Rise?
was what I was playing, but obviously everything was just a temporary distraction until Metroid comes out tomorrow. So that's hey, we haven't had a new Metroid's it's been almost 15 years. I don't know how many years it's been since Other M. Other M was
I've
on the
actually never played a Metroid
wow.
game.
I just
I'm
ended our
sorry.
we just ended our friendship right now. It just happened
I'll watch, like, if
instantly.
you stream it, I'll watch you
You
play.
watched all the best games that you should play because you miss on that part of the feeling.
Yeah, I
Some
don't know.
games
I just feel
some
like
games are fine
my
to
time,
watch.
I just feel like it eats up a lot of my time. And like for some games, I can kind of leave it on in the background when I work and just, take a peek once in a while. I
Yeah,
know it's not the same, but it's like I just want the gist of it.
I I, I
Kind of
did
understand it.
I took advantage of Twitch streaming before Twitch streaming existed. When I was in art school, I would invite my friend Ben and Evan, both of them over, and make them play the games that I didn't have time to play. So
Nice.
they'd be playing the game, and I would be drawing my homework, and I would just be living vicariously through them, which is basically what streaming became. It's like, oh, can I watch other people play games and then feel like I've played more than I have? But yeah, it's, when we think back, it's like it is kind of an interesting thing talking about, games that have that kind of impact on you. For me, like one of the big ones that impacted me that way was Final Fantasy VI. And I think
Mm.
like I consider Final Fantasy VI one of my favorite games ever because it makes you deal with like loss and despair and
Mhm.
most games don't. It's like spoilers, if you haven't played Final Fantasy VI and
Oh,
you intend to,
I, I'm in the middle of playing that.
you are actually? Oh, dang
Yes.
it. But how far are you? Where are you at?
I think I suplexed the train and then I
Okay.
left it there.
Suplex the train. Are you playing the Steam build where they ruined the pixel art?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. It's such a travesty.
Eh,
It's
But the
such a
story's
travesty.
pretty good so far, though.
It the like I've talked to you about it before. I was hoping to talk about
Mhm.
it on this stream. Now I don't know if I
Oh, no.
can.
Oh, yeah. It's okay. Just talk about it.
No, I don't want to spoil
It's
like
fine.
I don't
Well,
want to talk
I've
about
watched
anything
some.
specific, but like the big thing
Mhm.
with Final Fantasy VI is you lose halfway through the game.
Yeah,
And
that's what I've heard.
that's the big thing with that game. And you when you've played every other game and you always expect to, here's this big threat and you're rising up against it and then you beat it and the credits roll. It's like 90% of games. But when you play Final Fantasy VI, it builds up that way and then you lose. And then you have to find all your characters again. And then they're experiencing all of these different things. They're fear, regret, they're experiencing, depression. And it's like,
Mhm.
and you have to convince them to join you, but not all of them want to. Most of them don't want to.
Mhm.
Most of them are trying to move on. They're embarrassed, they're ashamed, they feel. So it's like it's a much larger complex string of emotions than you typically feel in a game. And it's something that games don't make you confront, but everyone faces in real life. I think
Mhm.
Majora's Mask is similar in that regard, where it makes you deal with not being able to pull everything off at once, where you can't successfully solve every problem. You're
Mhm.
gonna leave some
More
things
realistic that
unsolved.
way.
Yeah, you have to make decisions. And even on that last playthrough before the moon comes to crashing, you can only resolve so many of those things and make them feel resolved. So it's like I think there's something when games actually make you deal with complex emotions that
Mhm.
can be beautiful, but it's very difficult to pull off. And when games approach it too overtly, it
Mhm.
can just like talking too much about it, it makes
Yeah.
it worse, not better.
Mhm. Yeah.
So it's like, do you have any
And
games that come to mind that really grab that for you?
um, for the narrative, I think the first like game that I ever played like that was narrative heavy where there's like a lot of reading was have you heard of To the Moon?
Yeah, I played To the Moon.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's an RPG maker game. That's
Yeah,
about like
visually you can
uh
tell, but
yeah. Yeah.
there's no
It's like a
combat.
story driven yeah, it's just like a bunch of puzzles, I
Yeah,
guess. And it's like it's more of like a story driven experience, but like two doctors traversing, I think, through like a dying man's
yeah, through his
memories
memories
or
in
something
the
to
coma.
like yeah, to fulfill his like last wish or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Mhm.
His last wish was to go to the moon, right? That was the whole.
Yeah.
And then the that game really explored the question of the mind itself,
Hmm.
where it was like, what is it like, and is perception equal to reality? I think is another thing that they touched on while kind of going vaguely about it is thinking that you've experienced something the same as experiencing it, and that's kind of interesting that we say that because isn't that what games are? Right? Like
Yeah.
they're tricking. We play horror games, but we're not like literally running down the street being chased by some murderer or some ghost, right? It's like there's something in tricking yourself to being experiencing things that
Hmm.
you wouldn't be experiencing. And that's the big difference between games and movies, right? It's like
Hmm.
when you watch a horror movie, you don't feel like they're in your house. But when you're playing a horror game, you can. There's something
I don't know. When you're watching a horror movie, I still feel there in my house.
I get a little jumpy, but I don't get they don't really scare me that much anymore. It's like and maybe horror I haven't found a horror game that scared me in a long time. Maybe I'm just
Uh,
getting
I don't
jaded and
know.
old.
I feel like horror games kind of all have that similar like formula nowadays.
Mm,
Um, Have you played Visage?
No,
Visage?
Visage,
Visage?
probably
Yeah,
Visage. Yeah.
yeah.
No, I haven't played that.
But yeah, I think that was like the last game that I watched my friend play, and I think that one was
You
pretty
know,
good.
for me, it's still the classics like
Yeah,
Silent Hill and Fatal
Silent Hill.
Frame.
Oh,
Fatal
Fatal Frame.
Fatal
Oh
Frame is
yeah.
like my favorite, but I don't know if it's my favorite just because people know it less. You know that like underdog syndrome where it's
Do they?
like,
I thought it was pretty popular, Fatal
well, if
Frame.
compared to like Silent Hill or
Mm,
like Resident Evil or some
mm,
other bigger horror franchise, it's like
mm,
when you meet someone that has played Fatal Frame, then you're like, oh, that loves Fatal Frame. You're like, it's not as common. It's like you could say Silent Hill
mm,
2, and there's lots of people who do, but
mm,
like Fatal Frame 2 and 3 are less common when you talk about
mm.
those. It's kind of
Yeah.
funny. Did I tell you? Did I ever tell you my story at the? Well, you were with me at Bit Summit in Japan.
Mm,
Did I
mm.
ever tell you when I thought I met the creator of Fatal Frame? Oh
No.
my gosh, it's the most embarrassing
Did you?
story ever.
Or you didn't?
I didn't, but I thought I did. It was we were at the Pixel Junk party. Do you remember that? Did you go to the Pixel Junk
Yes.
party?
Yeah, I think I was with you
I
guys,
met
so
Koji Kondo
maybe.
there, which was a pretty cool
Oh,
experience.
oh, that's right. No, I think I went back to my room because I had like a headache or something.
Yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
at that party,
Yeah.
um, I was because everyone had the name tags, right? And it told
Mhm.
what their name was. And we were
Mhm.
looking at Amy and I were literally looking up the name tags that we saw and on the phone and just seeing if what they had worked on, right? Because
Mhm.
there's some big wigs. It was in Kyoto, so
Mhm.
Nintendo home
Mhm.
base. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
really interesting people from Japan there.
Mhm.
For instance, I met Koji Kondo there with photo there, but
Yeah.
it's pretty phenomenal.
Oh,
But
I should have just like waited out my headache. I shouldn't have went home.
So Amy and I looked at this one name tag at this guy in passing, right? He was like
Mhm.
a middle, older Japanese man, scruffy looking, and
Mhm.
we just caught it out of the corner of our eye and we looked it up, and in the description it was like creator of Fatal Frame, and I was like, I have to talk to him. I have to talk to the creator of Fatal Frame. So I I snuck up beside him and I started talking to him and someone there was translating for me and it turns out he wasn't like the creator of Fatal Frame. He was like a big creator person on um Grand Blue Fantasy, which is like
Oh.
one of the biggest mobile games. And at that point in time, I had not heard of Grand Blue Fantasy, and it's hilarious that I was like, "Oh, whatever," I was like, I felt so weird, and I didn't know the game that he worked on, and then I had to, because I'm like, I thought he had worked on Fatal Frame, then it turns out he'd worked on this other massive franchise.
Mhm.
I completely
Wait,
did.
so like the was Google wrong or
I
did they
it
just
was
use
the
the
first
same
part of
name?
his name that was wrong. It was like 3 letters off between the two names, and it was
Oh.
like, oh dang it. But even still, if I would have known that now, because I played the heck out of the Grand
Mhm.
Blue Fantasy fighting game that
Mhm.
Axis Works did, and now I know more of the lore that goes into it and stuff like that. So it's like it's still embarrassing, but it's kind of funny when you you mismeet someone. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh.
I think that like when I think about how games have impacted me, there's a bunch of different ways, right? It's like the games that do it just by emotion that they emit alone. Like some games do it through pure atmosphere. It's like Souls have gotten me that way before, like Dark Souls or and some games are terrible, but they still succeed so well in other places. Is like Fragile Dreams to the Moon was this really obscure Wii game with amazing atmosphere and the worst gameplay. It was like torture to play, but it was like majestic in its own right. It's like there is something really entertaining and bewitching about that world, and then you got into combat and you were like flipping out and you were so upset with the game for everything it was failing at.
That's that's how I felt when I was playing I think Final Fantasy X, where I played like Blitzball.
Yeah,
I was like, I just never wanted to play that game again.
yeah, Blitzball was not particularly good. The voice
No.
acting in that game is hilarious when you play Final Fantasy
Yeah.
X now.
Yeah.
It's the notorious laugh and stuff. But it had some heart. It had some stuff in the right places. It's not my
Yeah.
favorite Final Fantasy, but
Mhm.
it's definitely yeah. It's kind of funny because I think I saw an interview with Himenobu Sakaguchi, the creator of Final
Mhm.
Fantasy, and he was talking about how the jump to 3D and realism actually made the storytelling worse. And there was
Mhm.
something about the gap with obscure visuals and storytelling that lets people's brains fill in more, and it's actually almost easier to get immersed than it is when things look more immersive. It's like, wait, I think that's an interesting approach because I think the question was specifically to him that Final Fantasy VI was a big group of people's favorite game. How was this game that's like pixel art, right? Like still all of these people's favorite game when Final Fantasy is like, and the trend actually is as Final Fantasies got better looking, they were less often people's favorite. It's like starts with like 6 and then it like declines in my opinion slowly, right? But it's like 6, 7, 8, 9 are typically the range where almost everyone's favorite Final Fantasy is in. And then the better it looks after that, the worse the game is. And you could
Hmm.
argue that staffing changes and whatnot caused that, and maybe if different staff were in there, that it would make a bigger difference. But yeah,
Hmm. Yeah, I think I definitely need to finish six to
you have
know
an
like the
opinion on it.
full depth. Um, I'm not a big fan of the combat. Like I think it's been a while since I last played, but like the combat, like you can't see their health, right?
You can
Can
get,
you?
well, okay, you
You,
can't
you,
see
can, you,
their
you have, you can have a skill that reveals it, but like
scan.
I
There's a
hate
reveal
that.
called scan that reveals
Yeah,
it. Didn't you play Octopath though?
I did, and I didn't
That
like
game
how
does
they hid. Yeah, I
Octopath
didn't
does not
like.
respect your time at all. It's like fights take
I
a
just
year in
yeah.
that game.
I just like seeing, all the information there. Maybe it's just like I was like trained from Star Renegades. Like I need all of my information on the screen at
I
all
need
times.
every bit. I need to know every potential property this
Yeah,
suggests. Yeah,
exactly.
I'm the opposite. I'm like, give me less on this. Well,
You like
yeah.
to figure it out as you go along.
Yeah, I like when games are a
I've heard
puzzle.
that.
I'm
Mhm,
I'm a weird player in the sense that like I hate hard modes on games, but I love when a game's
mhm,
hard. Partially
mhm,
because I mean, game developers don't typically playtest hardest modes enough. They
mhm,
like often just 2x health on everything, and then everything you're
mhm,
just sitting there batting it forever, and it's like
mhm,
that's not an enjoyable experience to me. My
mhm,
favorite hard games are the ones that really make you think and put you and don't give you an option out of it. There's no easy way out of it. It's like,
mhm.
I mean, I played every Souls game without complaining, and I play Sekiro. Sekiro, out of all the Souls games, I beat all of them. I've never had that much grief, but the Sekiro got me a couple of times. That was the only Souls one
Mm.
that ever got me, where it was so hard that I was like, I died on the last boss like at least 80 times. At
Yeah,
least.
because that's like when you die, you just start back at like the save point and then you go again, right?
Yeah, all Souls
Yeah,
games work that way. They
yeah.
have kind of a, because I mean, a big problem.
Mm,
I was talking about this a bit with Tyler and Graham, but a big problem
mm,
that modern games have is some conventions that make gameplay better hurt atmosphere and world building. Like
mhm,
for instance, autosaving. It
mhm,
it benefits a lot of it respects your time. It
mhm,
benefits gameplay in specific ways. Um, it makes losing less frustrating, but it also breaks immersion in a lot of ways. I was playing the medium, right? And in the medium, when you die, you restart like
oh
30
yeah.
seconds before, right? It's
Mhm.
like literally 30 seconds before. And there was something about playing like Silent Hill 2 or Fatal Frame and you being chased, and it's like if you die, you lose an hour. You remember the
Yeah.
last save point.
I
You
hate that though. Oh, I
you
hate
might
that so
hate it, but it
much.
makes you feel
Mhm,
more and it makes what's in front of you, it makes the
mhm,
threat tangible because there's something real you're losing. You're losing your time,
mhm,
right? You are losing a bit of something tangible, and that's making them have more presence. When you only lose 30
mhm,
seconds, you don't actually, you stop thinking of that. It's possible. People can get around
mhm,
this. I'm sure
mhm,
that there are ways to keep the new gameplay algorithms. Maybe I'm just a masochist for old school torture in video games, but it's like I don't think that I don't know if someone would have to give me a good example of a game that maintains the agency of it. And I think Souls is actually probably the best example because you don't lose your progress in the sense of you only lose one thing, you don't lose another. You lose where you like everything you got by walking there, but you don't lose everything you've seen and you don't lose everywhere you've been. You have now a sense of more space. You've traveled more, but the timeline progression is continuously moving forward. So there's something that Souls does with that where it kind of works around the problem and you don't lose everything, you lose a specific thing. You lose the souls that you brought with you. that you've gained by killing everything along the way. So you're losing that, and you'll have to refarm that, but you're not losing everywhere you've stepped. You're not losing the items you found. So it's like they found kind of a balance between it where that keeps the threats real because you're still losing something, and then that makes those enemies feel more tangible, but you're not losing everything, and it's not completely disrespecting your time that way.
Yeah, I feel like you're playing a lot of games that like I rarely play or
Yeah.
play like opposite games.
What are you playing? Tell me what you're playing, Jacqueline.
Right now, actually, I don't know. I go in like a weird little like spree sometimes. Like sometimes I would just want to binge like a bunch of movies, and then after like I would move on to anime, and then after I would go back to games. So
That's
there's always like
actually
a
it's not different than me at all.
yeah.
So no, so I actually have what I call an inspiration cycle. So
Mhm,
my inspiration cycle is like it's usually like a Western TV show and then like an anime and then like a game and then it's
mhm,
like that in a loop over and over again. And
mhm,
then
mhm,
and then when I make more art after I've taken in all of those things, then it's kind of like all of those new experiences start coalescing in my brain into something that I can make new. But you're
mhm.
probably just your cycle's inverted from mine right now. We're off
Yeah,
cycle
we're
axis.
yeah, we're not synced up.
Yeah. So well, I know you just finished watching Squid Game, and
Yeah,
then
and also Midnight Mass, which I highly recommend
okay.
if you like horror or supernatural.
I love
Um,
horror and supernatural, so I'll probably
yeah,
check that out.
yeah. And it's like by the same director who did The Hill House and the
Mm,
Bly Manor series, Mike Flanagan.
yeah.
Mhm.
So
But like,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, especially for like level design and like world building. Like, for me, I feel like I need to get my inspiration outside of games because I
Mm,
don't want to be like, oh, this game did that. Like, it seems cool. I want to do that. And
yeah, definitely. Like reading
mhm,
Berserk and Full Metal is definitely doing that to me right
mhm,
now. Where it's like
mhm,
the way that they achieve character building and stuff, especially in Berserk.
mhm,
Berserk is like it has the most tangible characters in the least tangible world that I think I
mhm.
might have experienced. Maybe well, it's a very dark world, but it's like it's very supernatural. Like
Yeah, Berserk. Is that on Netflix as well?
you don't watch anything,
Berserk?
just read the
Well,
mangas.
just read, yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's notoriously the one manga series. It's like if you look on the top manga list, it's like within the top five of like every top manga list ever. Oftentimes in the top one spot, but it has never had a proper anime adaptation. Everything is
Mm,
like the animes are like a 7 out of 10 out of best, and avoid
mhm,
them and read the manga. It's like the one where you avoid it and you read the manga 100%. Like
mm.
there's no redeeming qualities in doing anything else. You're ruining it for yourself by doing it any other way.
All right. I'll read
So
that next. I was
uh,
reading, I think, Demon Slayer, but I'll move on to Berserk.
there's some really dark stuff in it, but the thing that really gets me about it is the tangibility of
Mhm,
the characters. Like it's funny because Guts started the giant sword trend. It was like he
mhm,
was one of the very first giant sword characters. But when it's like when you understand what he went through to be able
mhm,
to carry that, it's life's nuts. Like it's
mhm,
so nuts. And then when you see like Cloud or like whatever his name is and Sword Art Online, and they're these tiny guys that have very mediocre pasts, and then they're suddenly carrying these large swords. Like you don't believe it. But when Guts has it, you're like, holy freaking crap! He went through all of that. Now he can carry this sword. And the other thing that's different between it is in these other like anime or games or whatnot, like Final Fantasy VII with Cloud, the sword doesn't feel like it's as big as it is, right?
mhm,
It's like it's acting like a regular sword, but it's big for specifically for novelty and aesthetic. It's not big and operates big. But when Guts like fights things and he swings a sword, like he'll take off the head of a horse and half of the guy with the sword. Like the sword feels big. It's very different than what you get in other things, and it's made me think a lot about character building and world building because it's hard to build good characters. And a lot of the things that are best about when they pull off good characters, they show you, they don't tell you outright. Like if someone came along and was like, Guts is this because of this and this, it would have ruined everything. Right?
mhm,
It's like instead they just show you this tough life and they make it make sense why they did it. And it's like when I'm playing Tales of Arise, it's the exact opposite. It's just like a bunch of people talking about stuff at you, and then you're like, I don't
mhm,
really believe any of this. Can I just
mhm.
go back to cutting things? And then you want to skip the dialogue and the cutscenes. You're like, let me skip
Yeah,
this. I want to
yeah.
be done with this. But I mean, there's definitely something to be said for taking inspiration from everything around you. Trying to make it work in a game is often
Mhm.
difficult, but it's definitely worth trying. I don't know if that resonates with anything for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel the same way pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What specifically are you trying to work in? Is there something that really inspired you?
Um, I guess I was like I wouldn't say like inspired me, but like I guess I was recently moved by watching like Midnight Mass.
Mm,
I don't want to spoil it.
I
It's
have to
just
watch
something
that.
you yeah, it's just like I just like how Mike Flanagan like I guess his shows kind of do classify as a horror, but it's like it's never really like a bunch of, like jump scares.
Mm,
They're usually tying in like a supernatural element to like a well thought out plot line,
yeah.
in my opinion. Yeah, I don't know if you've watched any of his
You have the names
series.
from the other series, and I might know,
Yeah, it's like
but
the Haunting of Hill House. Oh yeah, you said you watched that
I watched
one.
a movie based on. I think it was The House on
Oh,
Haunting Hill. It might have been different.
oh,
There's so many
that's a
things with
different one.
different
Yeah,
words and like,
yeah.
but I'll have to check it out because I haven't
Mhm.
seen a good horror series in a while, and I do like them.
You'll really like this one because it's
Okay.
not like on the nose, like in your face.
Well,
Little girl with long black hair jumps out at you
Yeah, I always
horror.
found that the difference between like how Japanese handled horror and the Western
Mhm.
audience handled horror was pretty stark. It's like Japanese
Mhm.
they'll tie a sound to an entity or something, and
Mhm.
then they'll use it to make you unsettled all the time, and no place is safe. Whereas like
Mhm.
Western horror will often do that, like uh, fake scare and then the real scare afterwards, and there's like it's like set patterns. It's set patterns with both, but the I guess it's more subconscious what the Japanese are doing with tying a
Yeah, it's
sound
more of
to
like
it and then
it's
make
atmospheric, I would say.
yeah, well, I'm just like by
Yeah.
tying a sound to an entity, right? Like every time they come
Mhm.
on having a specific sound, then
Yeah.
it's like when you hear that sound, now you're not even aware as you're watching
Mhm.
because it kind of just you start associating the two, and then when they could be playing it in a regular setting, you'd be like drinking a cup of coffee, and then you feel like really unsettled. You're like, why is this drinking a cup of coffee feel so unsettling? And it's
Mhm.
because of
Or
that.
like have you watched The Autopsy of Jane Doe on
No, that's not.
oh, yeah, but there was like this scene, is it spoilers? Hmm, I don't know. Should I just not? I guess
It's
I
up to you.
like
You can say it if you want.
kind of okay.
I'll forget it
Well,
by the time I watch it again.
spoiler alert. Well, it's kind of like there's this like son and dad who work at a morgue,
Hmm.
and then like all their I guess the corpses that they deal with, like they all have like a bell around the toe. I
Okay.
think it's like a tradition or something just to mark that they're deceased. So like I think in one of the scenes, like it's just like a pitch black hallway and then they're kind of trapped in this room. But
Yeah.
then you just hear like bells ringing, like I guess like intermittently,
Hmm.
like someone was walking with bells strapped around their foot.
Yeah.
But it's just like you don't see it at all, but just hearing that sound and like recalling to that time, like that they explained why they put like the bell around like the toe. It's like you make that connection instantly.
Yeah. The
And I don't know
association.
why, but that just freaked the hell out of me.
It's kind
Like
of
I had to
interesting. Well,
pause. Yeah.
it's like the siren sound that comes in Silent Hill every time they go to
Mhm.
the demon world, right? It's like
Yeah, exactly.
specific things that are tied. Like that's an example where they do it in a game. Um, they have similar kind of sounds that always kind of permeate Fatal Frame to make you feel like a lot of the like chimes and
Mhm.
stuff like all the ritual stuff, the
Hmm.
Shinto
Or
rituals.
there's like I think there's a sound that I forgot what it's called, but like there's a sound that they play like a certain decibel, and it just makes you feel unsettled. Like you hear like a kind of low hum. They do this in Phasmophobia,
Okay.
like when you go into the house and instantly you just feel like you're kind of covered with like a heavy sort of fog.
Hmm.
But like that entire time, like when you're in that house trying to find like hunt the ghost, it just feels really unsettling.
Hmm. I gotta
Have you played it yet,
We gotta make a
Phasmophobia?
horror game. You and I gotta make a horror game together.
Yeah.
That's on the list at some point in time. We'll
Oh,
co-direct it together, and
excellent.
it will have everything. We'll have all of these things. We'll find that noise. We'll find sounds to associate with
Perfect. Yeah, I
things.
feel like sound design is like has a really strong like precedence in storytelling than
Well,
I give it credit for at least.
it's kind of going back a bit. Like my
Yeah.
wife and I, we have something we review games by called The Great
Mm-hmm.
Eight, and
Mm-hmm.
one of them is resonance and like what's like storytelling, world building, resonance, atmosphere, music, all of that. And it's like music is so critical for creating atmosphere in games, right? It's like
Yeah.
having the right soundtrack is just like I don't know, specific songs can even just bring tears to my eyes like randomly. It's like make you well up when it's like I don't know
Like
what it is specifically about that that speaks so
like
much to you.
Near's what was that song?
Emil's song, Emil's song.
Yeah, yeah, Emil's
Yeah,
song.
that one. Well, okay, like that. I mean, that's an interesting thing to touch on because that song has made
Mhm.
me cry like 50 times this year. But it's kind of been like my theme song for this year because
Mm.
my dad passed away in March, and it
Mhm.
seems to resonate. There's something about it that brings up those kind of feelings for me. And then I went on a classic game binge, and it was kind of funny because it's like, we're talking about this. It's like I wasn't able, like for the last few years, I go back and try to play a classic game, and I wouldn't give it the time. I'd play for like 2 minutes, and then I get annoyed, and then I would just turn it off, right? And then after though, then all of a sudden I went and I played every Mega Man game, and I played every. I've been playing every. I literally played every Mega Man. I played 1 through 11 and X1 through. I played X1 through 4. I didn't do 5, 6, 7, 8, and then I played Legends 1 and 2. So I played way too much Mega Man, and then I've been playing like when I get the little nooks and crannies of time. I've been playing through the Metroidvanias, so Metroid Fusion, Zero Mission, so on and so forth, and Castlevanias, a bunch of those. So, but
Mhm.
it's interesting kind of bouncing back and forth and how things can resonate or trigger specific things. Different songs come to mind, or like even a song could become a theme for you for a year. When you're playing the game, it just represents this emotion so beautifully that when you experience that emotion in your life, it just brings it to mind and it becomes kind of like tethered to it.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
It, that's interesting. Like I've never actually went back to play any old games.
No?
I
Just
think
always
no,
forward.
not at all.
Forward.
Yeah, because like once I play something, I'm like, okay, I get it. Now, next thing.
Yeah.
But like music is always something I eventually come back to.
Yeah, well, you can do music doing other things.
Yeah.
So that's the advantage of that.
Terra's theme.
Sorry,
Final
was that
Fantasy 6.
Terra's theme? Oh
Terra's
yeah,
theme. Yeah.
yeah. I thought you said Parasite Eve, and I was like, also a
Oh,
good soundtrack. No big
yes.
issues there. I love that game
Both
soundtrack.
are good.
I miss Parasite Eve. It fit like such a weird niche between RPG and horror.
Mhm.
I played Kadelka recently, which is another. It's the beginning of the Shadow Hearts series,
Mhm.
um, and that game it does not respect your time at all. It takes like 50 seconds to load in every fight, and then every action
Oh.
takes so long. Like it's painful. It's very painful in that. But I actually
Mhm.
played through it. I beat it anyways, despite all that pain. I was like, there's something about it that captured me. But there's
Mhm.
something interesting that hasn't been explored a long time of that like space between RPG and horror that both Parasite Eve and Kodelka did that I kind of would like to see more of. But there's something really cool about Parasite Eve's because it was like an active combat where you could still dodge things, but um, it was still able to maintain that kind of horror theme along the way. It felt scary enough. That's a kind of hard line to ride when you're picking things from menus and stuff.
I feel like we need to make a list of all the games we should play, and then well, like during our socials, I guess every week we can like
Just play one.
someone can stream it, yeah, and play.
Play one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an interesting idea. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of weird because it's like it's so mood based when you actually go out
Mhm.
and play, right? It's like something
Mhm.
comes to mind, some feeling, and you are trying to capture it.
Mhm.
What was the last feeling game that you were driven to play? Just something
Oh
maybe.
man. I don't know. I'm pretty dead inside. I don't.
Whoa, whoa! I don't believe that to be
Um,
true at all. I know you too well for that.
uh, I think honestly, I'm drawing a blank right now, and I can't look through my Steam library because it's not loading. So,
Yeah,
but I
yeah.
think the last game I probably like sunk a lot of hours into is I think Dragon Age
Okay.
Origins.
The original Origins?
Yeah, the original Origins. I
Oh
think I
man,
sunk like 100 hours and I made one of every single character just so
R-
I could
really?
explore all
Like
like the
every
different
type?
endings. Yeah,
Crazy.
and romance all the different people I
So
could.
you just played the whole when you did that recently?
No, I did that like when I was in university, which is like ages ago.
Oh, when you have
That was
time.
like yeah, when I had time. I don't
Do,
have 100 hours now.
Do you find that like making games has disenchanted games to you in any regard?
Um, I don't think so because Mm, no, I think I still enjoy games very much as like in that consumer mindset.
Mhm.
But I don't know. Has it been the same for you?
I think I've seen a little bit too much behind the scenes, and
Hmm.
I it takes a certain amount for me to get to the point where um I stop looking behind the scenes. Like a game really has to grab me on the narrative or the music or the gameplay
Mm.
pretty early for me to stop trying to peek behind the curtains.
Oh,
And
I
that's
see.
that's and maybe it's like a difference between our jobs, right? When
Hmm.
it comes to that, because for you it's like, from going before doing UI, which is like the
Hmm.
front layer of interaction with it and that, but
Hmm.
it's like basically everything that I'm doing to games involves trickery. It's like masking
Hmm.
or making compromises that affect people's eyes, right? So it's like when you are behind the scenes, it's that kind of age old adage, is that the word? Where it's like people, like it's hard to appreciate the work that you do, right? Your own
Like, yeah.
projects, your own work, and then it's much easier to, and that I feel like that's kind of, some games can grab me beyond that. Like Nier Automata definitely did. 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim did last
Hmm.
year, and I have actually been enjoying the break from gaming more so. Not that I've had a complete break, and tomorrow I'm definitely going to be deep in Metroid Dread, but to reading. I don't typically read often, and to just like literally plow through so many manga in such a short period of time, it's like every night. Amy, my wife is so annoyed from flipping pages sound, where it's just like flipping pages over and over again when she's trying to sleep. But it's yeah, it's funny though. It's like it does make me think about like what different things I could take from them and pull them in. And sometimes it's like the most small, beautiful games that kind of implement these things well. And like you're mentioning To the Moon, right? Which is a game
Hmm.
that picks a couple of things that it's trying to make resonate with players, and it really focuses on them.
Because I think like To the Moon was one of like the first games where I saw like like they didn't really take themselves too seriously in terms of the dialogue.
Hmm.
Like I
Yeah.
think the doctors like I think they were also doing some breaking of the fourth wall by like talking to the audience or referring to this game as like a sort of game.
Yeah. I mean, Metal Gear always had a history of
Yeah.
doing that, so it's
Hmm.
like you would get a bit of that if you played all the Metal Gear
Hmm.
Solid games, but it's
Hmm.
like, and there's a few other games. It's
Yeah.
it's like that kind of stuff you have to handle really well to pull it off. Breaking
Hmm.
the fourth wall.
Yeah.
It's like a specific writing masterclass, and if you do it too hard, it just kind of breaks everything. You
It's
have
like
to
too yeah,
you
too
have to
there's a balance.
yeah, you have to find that, like find the right way to do all of that. Um, hmm.
Don't mind me filling up.
No, 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 no. Well, I was gonna uh if you were to make a horror game, what it would be about?
Oh, I don't know. Like to be honest with you, it's like I'm open to anything. I think I don't have like a grand scheme or like a dream to like make the best thing or but like I'm okay with helping, like helping people achieve their dreams. Kind of
Yeah.
like if you have a really good idea and like I hear about it and I get excited about it, like I'm happy to just like jump on board and help you with whatever you need.
Yeah, I'm usually like
Yeah.
I'm kind of drawn between the two. Like
Mhm.
I sometimes don't enjoy the pressure of being responsible for all of it. And
Oh yeah.
sometimes I want the pressure. And then sometimes I'm happy just to have a game that I'm slightly indifferent to, that I have a massive list of assets to make. And
Mhm.
then, because in a way, that's like more stress free. You know what you have to do, art style set, everything
Yeah.
set. Here's it, and it's a weird thing, and it's probably that people in general are adverse to growth, right?
Hmm.
Because growth can be exhausting, and
Hmm.
facing your weaknesses constantly can be
Hmm.
exhausting, or trying to, and games are such a problem because games can look like anything, right? So it's
Hmm.
like I know a lot of concept artists that love that concept art window. They
Hmm.
love that thing where it can look like anything, and just drawing lots of stuff and coming up with ideas. They love that space, and I've done well in that space, but that space is not the space I enjoy. It's the space that makes me question myself. It makes me doubt myself. And then when I've set a direction and everyone's happy with it, and then you can just push it and push it and push it, that's usually the space. That's the point where I feel happiest, but I probably grow most from that time struggling. But then it's like being adverse to struggling.
Hmm. Yeah, I know what you mean. Like I think for me, especially with oh, I guess a project that I'm working on, but never mind.
Never break NDA.
Yeah.
Talk vaguely around. It's all good.
Um, yeah, it's just like I guess I've been faced with certain challenges in like the world design and how to build things a certain way, especially in terms of like scalability. And like I had to take into account a lot of things that I didn't have to before. So I had to do a lot of different passes over and over again. And like every time when I would play through it and I'd be like, oh, there's this thing that doesn't feel right. It's like, oh, it's like how can I solve that problem? Or to like,
And then you have to deal with stupid, annoying people
evoke
like me that are like, "Oh, Brian's gonna hate
no.
this part," or something like this, or he's gonna be fighting on this, and I'll be like,
Or it's just like I want to make it, a good, and I don't want to make it fun, right, for you guys
I
or for our players.
I think that's been the biggest thing that I think we've encountered through
Mhm.
our work specifically is sometimes the biggest problem is that everyone cares too much about the game that they're making.
Yeah, that's
And
that's a good problem to have, I
it's a
think.
good problem to have, but it's exhausting sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that.
I've done mobile games in the past,
Hmm.
and I don't care particularly much most of the time that I've worked on mobile games. And just from the sense that I've never like it's not my heart. I'm not like, I want to make the next big Metroid game or like something like that. That's my or like a crazy horror game or something where I can get behind it. It's not going to be like this app does this, right? This game it's like and I can get behind it like the workspace and stuff of that. It's like I mean, I can push myself to do anything if I agree to it. It's not really that, but I'm not going to be like insanely inspired the same way that I would be with, a game project where, I can push myself and really have a vision for what it would be and imagine myself playing it and trying to find that make that game that everyone would want to play in that space. And hopefully I've grown to the point where I'll be able to pull that kind of stuff off soon, in a way that people respond well with. Because I mean, you know this first off, but the audience isn't always what you're expecting. It's not always easy to deal with, and things aren't always on face value.
I feel like maybe, yeah, kind of. I just feel like, hmm, I feel like the audience is like something that we need to do more research on to like know who you're targeting,
Hmm.
and then work backwards from there by doing more research about like, the kinds of games that they play, what movies they watch.
And how much though is giving them what they want, and how much is defying their expectations?
I know. It's a balance of like your own vision and
Yeah, yeah, totally.
yeah,
Well, you
yeah.
need a demographic for your vision, and there's no point in doing the work because you have
Hmm.
nothing to sell at the end of it, right?
Hmm.
Unless
Yeah.
the vision is so strong that it's just, immerses people in a way that they couldn't have anticipated. Which I mean
Hmm.
is every creative's hope, but
Hmm.
then it kind of comes back down to this like the pixel art discussion we had at the beginning, where you don't always because each game is a gamble, it's a bet, right?
Yeah.
It's a time sink investment in bet, and you could see why a big studio would keep releasing the same franchise year after year because it's a sure bet, right? But that then I can also see why those teams would want to leave, like Bungie, and form their own studio afterwards because they've been forced to make this giant property for however many years, and that's tiring in its own way, right? Being trapped by your own creation.
Yeah.
I've yet to
Mm.
make anything that successful that I'm trapped by it, but
You
we'll
want to
see.
be trapped by it though?
No, but I think everyone wants one thing that's big enough that they can walk away from.
Yeah.
This is kind of true. You're talking about this horror series, right? And you're following it because you're getting interested in the director. And I
Hmm.
think that I was talking, you might have more insight into this. I was talking to Graham and Tyler a bit about this, but um, what do you think about projects or games where you actually successfully follow the creators rather than the franchise? The things that transcend beyond franchise, right? Where you're talking about the specific director and you follow the series. And even if they made like whatever was it, the house had eyes or hills or whatever. Two, and it was a different director, you would know to avoid it because it's not their style to do the same franchise over and over again, right? I don't know if there's anything, because I've always kind of wanted to make those kind of experiences where you can shift from experience to experience. And I think a good indie developer that's done this would be like Supergiant, where they've
Oh,
shifted.
like do different genres, kind of.
Well, they just shift from game to game, whatever
Mm.
they have on their heart, and they release the different games, and people
That's
follow the team, not the,
mhm. Mm.
like Dark Souls is another example of that. Hideki Miyazaki, right? It's like Dark Souls 2
Mhm.
didn't feel like Dark Souls because he didn't direct it. And then you can
Mhm.
tell the ones that he did, and it's like, meanwhile, you can play even Bloodborne or Sekiro, and he did direct it because you can feel it right
Mhm.
away, right? So it's
Mhm.
like there's something about, and you get this with directors in movies or TV shows or things on, and it's something weird when someone else is wearing someone else's skin, in the sense that when some other company has now carried the franchise. I actually heard a really interesting talk about this. I think it was the Crash Bandicoot situation, because Naughty Dog lost the rights to Crash Bandicoot after PS1. And then all of these studios that made the games for the PS2 and GameCube and Xbox, they they studied the game, but they couldn't study the development environment that made the game, right? It's
Mhm.
like you study the end product and then you kind of break it down into, oh, it's these systems, it's these mechanics, it's these things that made it successful. And then when you copy or you try to implement those, it feels soulless because you've broken it too far down. You're not What you can't capture is like the the environment that made that, right?
Mhm. Like I think they're doing this with what is it? Horror game. Dead Space, I
Dead
think.
Space. Oh,
They're
that's a
remastering it.
really interesting example because we're
Yeah.
having two games made simultaneously. We're having a
Yeah.
Dead Space remake, and we're having
Mhm.
a game come out by the creators of Dead Space.
Yeah, right.
So it's like one of them is wearing the skin of the previous game from
Hmm.
technically the company that owns the rights to it, but
Yeah.
not the team that worked on it. And then we have a
Mhm.
spiritual successor coming at the same time
Mhm.
from a
Mhm.
different team. So I mean, that's a wait and see kind of thing. It's
Mhm.
like, I mean, remakes are a little bit safer because you're dealing with source material. So it's like Blue Point's never particularly failed at making
Mhm.
remakes. Not that they're making this one, but there are teams that have successfully always nailed remakes, and then there are, but I don't know if EA could pull another like Dead Space 4 out of their hats and have it be good.
Yeah, but whenever people like hear things like, oh, the developers of Dead Space are making this other game, but everyone's just like, so quick to get excited about it.
It's kind of like the
Mhm.
producer delusion. When it's like on movie trailers when they're like the producer of this, and you're like, that's not the director.
Oh.
That's not the same person. Like, I get it. The producer, secures funding and gets rid of roadblocks in
Mhm.
the way and does some vision things, but they're not
Mhm.
really the person on the ground floor making it the same way. So
Mhm.
it's like it's always a weird thing to put in the credits for that because it's like trying to trick you to thinking that
Mhm.
it's
It's like
something that it's not.
associated. Yeah.
Yeah, when it's like doesn't feel associated in the end, but
Mhm.
not that they're always bad, but it's just a weird angle to play. It's kind of like
Mhm.
my cousin worked
No.
on this. It's like it feels like that when you
Yeah,
watch
yeah, I know
that,
what you
or
mean.
yeah,
I know what you mean.
yeah.
But like, yeah, but I think like producers do a lot of like they make everyone's lives a lot. Well, yeah, I guess like I feel like I have a deep appreciation for producers and all
I'm not
project
belittling the
managers.
job at all. Like the job
Yeah.
is 100% critical and important, but it's very
Hmm.
different from a director. It's like
Yeah.
I don't want to speak ill, but then it's like what they're doing is they're selling the artistic vision of
Hmm.
someone who was in charge of financing and steering the framework of the project, but not someone who
Hmm.
was in charge of the artistic vision. But they're selling it as the
Hmm.
artistic vision, and that's the weird thing.
Oh, I thought producers also have a say in it, no?
They can kind of have like the hard
Hmm.
yes or hard no, but they're not on
Hmm.
the set controlling the way things go down, right? It's more
Ah,
like the
okay.
general concept ideas, and then
Mm.
usually they're like whether they're going to fund some aspect of it or not,
Mm.
right? So it's like that's typically more the producer role being like,
Hmm.
no, we're not funding that. Yes, we're
Hmm.
funding this. Okay, you want
Yeah.
to do that part of this? Maybe do this
Hmm.
instead. So they can they
Hmm.
can kind of create the it's almost like from a game developer analog, it'd be like creating the engine tools and telling them what middlewares they can work with.
Hmm.
right? But they're not necessarily in that making the stuff the same way.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it's a different relationship.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I guess I'm so used to like the indie space where everyone just like wears multiple hats. So I'm like, oh,
oh yeah.
producer. They do all these things, right? It's like,
Producers also do art on the project, right? No,
he's like,
not
yeah.
typically.
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe.
what kind of storytelling do you want to do in games?
St like for me, I guess more so on like the world building,
Mm,
just like filling in, little, I guess giving people enough fluff so that they can kind of form their own stories.
mm,
I guess like for world building, you would, come up with things like, oh, like, for example, and I think The Last of Us, when Ellie, when you're in her room and you see all these posters on the walls, and like you
mm.
see like what kind of CDs or music that she's listening to, kind of things like that, that kind of like build out who she is as a character, but not necessarily telling you like on the nose, like, oh, she's a, like she likes to do this or that. You just kind of see it in the background and you can explore it if you want to.
I think the Life is Strange one did some really cool stuff with that
Yes, yes. Life is Strange
because
also did that.
you had to like I think because the stepdad was a jerk, so
Hmm.
you had to hide in the closet in this one scene. So you get like even the closet is kind of interesting because it's like it's not who you are right now. It's like who you used to be like who you used to be, who you're trying to hide, right?
Hmm.
It's like but you're
Hmm.
still attached to. So you have like these objects in it and it's like these are the things I used to care about. Now I'm hiding them away in the closet, right? It's like
Hmm.
it's kind of there's a lot of these little subtleties in world building that are super interesting. It's like how
Hmm.
do you approach that? What are you telling about a character by
Hmm.
even what you put in that space? And what are you telling about the world by what you put in that kind of space too?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's just giving people enough tools to work with that they kind of end up filling in the blanks with like their own assumptions
I
or
have
what they took from that.
I have kind of an interesting question for you based on that.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
how much how much is it worth recreating or creating something completely new, or pulling our world in? Like, let's say flora, fauna, and animals, right? When do you pull in a chipmunk, and when do you make up your own equivalent, and when do you deviate? And this is something I have to do visually, so I'm curious conceptually where you're at with that.
Mm. Oh, that is tough to answer. Like I feel like it's based on the emotion you're trying to convey.
Okay.
Or like I guess you have to kind of set a theme. Like let's say if you want to do like a high fantasy theme, or like a high fantasy or a high like I guess like a sci-fi
Mm.
fantasy kind of thing. Like you're not gonna well like maybe you'll have chipmunks, but maybe like you'll have cyborg chipmunks or chimeras or something. So like
Yeah.
I've sometimes have to like think in that vein. Or I start with the very basics first, like oh, like list of all the animals I think might be or might appear in this sort of biome. And then after I take it to the next level by like, okay, what happens if I, mix and match their bodies? Or what if like, they have
Yeah.
like a
Head of a head of a
wings
duck
instead?
and
Yeah,
a
head of a
butt of a
duck and like a
beaver.
body exactly.
How would
And they
that
like just
evolve
like
ever? Like, what would create that? It's like
I don't know. It's okay. Just
yeah.
just just roll with it.
It's a world where all of the fruit has very hard exteriors that need to be beaten,
Hmm.
and then the interior needs to be chipped at, and that's the food that
Exactly.
that animal has to eat. That's how you create that
Yeah.
animal. You'd
Yeah,
because
exactly.
it would be kind of like based off of what they eat and
It's
what
how it
they
works in real life, right?
yeah, no, basically
Yeah.
they evolve to whatever circumstances they need
Yeah.
to interact with. But it's like you know, I think that's kind of an interesting question. And I think this is an interesting framework to approach it because one of the things that I've kind of missed about classic games is like, and I've used this example before, but when you play like Mega Man 2 or Ninja Gaiden
Mhm.
1, they feel like they're on another planet in like some weird space just because the limitations were so harsh that everything that they were made they were forced to make alien because it was
Mhm.
harder to make something real than it was to make
Mhm.
alien. And now we're in the inverse situation where it's too easy to make something look representative, and then you end up with weird situations where it's like I always use this as the example, but it's like in Mega Man 2, it looks if you play Mega Man 2 on NES, it looks like you're who the heck knows where. You could be like on the third moon of some weird planet, like in some weird space, and then you play Mega Man 11 and it's a bunch of robots on Earth.
Mhm.
Right? It's like as the technology improved, it devolved to that. And my question for you is how do we get back there? How do we force ourselves back there despite the technological limitations? And when should we?
Mhm.
When should we deviate to weird animal-esque things that aren't
Mm.
like normal animals, and when should we keep them familiar? What is the advantage of each? And like,
Oh,
you get what I'm saying?
that's that's hard to say because like it really depends on your project and what you're trying to achieve, I guess. But like I know that's like I guess I do have some like guidelines to help myself get set up because I had like the longest um brainstorming session and I was like I guess I just got like constantly stuck in trying to like brainstorm like critters and certain fauna or
Yeah.
sorry flora
Yeah.
and like let's say if I was doing something like if something jungle themed maybe I guess I would kind of see what's already out there by looking at different photos of like jungles that exist in the real world and also jungles that I've seen in game. And like I've noticed like a lot of like the patterns, like the line patterns, so it's always something like viney or wavy. It's always curvy. There's never really any straight jagged edges.
Well, it's that would be in jungles because
Hmm.
that plants need light,
Hmm.
right? And because
And
they
they grow
need,
towards it. So
well, they
like it's
have to grow
always
towards it, and the only
yeah.
way they're going to reach it with is by literally twisting around tall things
Mhm.
and finding
Exactly.
nooks of it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And since it's in the jungle, like the trees, like the trees are probably the straightest thing, but like some of the trees are so thick that it just covers out sunlight. So
Mm.
sometimes like the vines always grow in like a really strange pattern. So I just try to think of it in terms of lines and shapes first, and then go from there.
It would probably help to think of like fruit too,
Yeah.
like what we were making that
Yeah.
example for, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, this byproduct of this plant, it needs to be eaten this way. Therefore, this animal would have to develop this thing to eat that.
Exactly. And they need like a long snout to, maybe like drink the nectar from this flower that I don't know.
The only way to eat this is it needs to be dissolved in this type of acid. So this one snorts
Yeah.
it into their first stomach, and then it dissolves, and then they spit it out and chew it. And it's
Mhm.
like their nose accesses
Exactly.
a stomach, and then their mouth accesses the second stomach, and
Exactly.
it's they have to
Yeah.
melt the outer side before they can. That's funny.
Yeah.
I might
Hmm.
have to turn that into a creature.
Yeah.
Uh,
Hmm. Maybe we should talk more about that because
we
I'm kind of
should.
stuck right now.
That's an interesting thing. It's like I'm just imagining all of these weird things. It's like you could have a fruit too, right? That has like
Mhm.
two weak points. It's like strong everywhere and it's sharp
Mhm.
and Barbie everywhere, but it's got two weak points on the
Mhm.
side. So it's like the animal has a specific type of tusk that comes around that pinches on both sides just to pop it open. And maybe their
Oh.
head, their skull is split in half at that part to be able to
Oh.
pinch. Maybe. I don't know. I'm
Mhm.
just making stuff up as I go along.
I
But
like that.
I'm literally thinking of making up fruit and then thinking of animals to problem solve that fruit.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because like yeah, because sometimes like I definitely get stuck. Like I'm just like okay, let's just do papaya and that's it. Because I get so tired sometimes. I'm
Yeah.
just like, oh, just keep it basic.
No, I
Or I
know.
think it's good to have like something familiar and something like that's out there.
But this is kind of like an interesting thing we can get onto, which is like the
Mm-hmm.
creative process can be is rewarding and exhausting
Hmm.
simultaneously. And
Hmm.
that's kind of what you're getting at. It's like sometimes you
Yeah.
just sit there and you're like, I am not feeling inspired enough to pull this off right now. And then other
Hmm.
times you are like, no, I want to try something different. I want to
Yeah.
approach this. And it's
Hmm.
like you dealing with your own kind of yin and yang of how you're
Hmm.
going to achieve that.
Hmm.
When are you going to problem solve it in that way, right? How are you going to
Yeah,
manage that?
exactly. And also sometimes like because we're indie as well, like we have a more, I guess like our timeline's more restricted. Like once we like it sometimes we might not have all the time in the world to like work on something, so we just have to go with something and just move on from
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
and come back to it if we have time later.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a decent approach there. It's worth trying to do that a lot of the time.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and I mean, there's advantages to being pushed forward and there's advantages to slowing down, right? And it's like each
Mhm.
project has periods of both, right? Where you
Oh
just
yeah,
power through. There's
sure.
some where I'm like, I finish a ludicrous amount of assets in a week, and there's other ones where I'm like, I feel like I'm
Yeah,
failing.
you're a machine.
Oh, it's funny because I don't feel as much like a machine lately, but even that, still people are like, you're a machine. I'm like, I feel like I'm failing. I feel like I don't know if it's
Need a little bit of oil, that's all.
yeah, maybe I need a little bit of oil. That's all it is. But it's kind of it's fun, right? It's like I have to say, like I haven't fallen out of love with making games, and which is
That's
something
good.
that I was afraid of, right? Is falling out of love with it. There's some parts in the process that are very frustrating even in the best situations, the best circumstances. There are some parts, and I mean, like most things in life, it's trying to grab yourself and force a better outcome,
Hmm.
right? How can you even do that most of the time?
Hmm.
It's hard to pull
Yeah,
off.
self-learning and just kind of overcoming that hump or obstacle,
Yeah, it's like
or like
self-motivation.
self-directed. It's tough.
Yeah. Like I don't know. I'm
I
trying. Sorry, go ahead.
I think what helps is that if we do more like collaborations, like especially for creative brainstorm collaborations, I feel like if we I know it's like everyone's kind of working remote now, so it's like hard to like just like turn around and be like, "Hey, what do you think of this?" Or what
Yeah.
if this animal has like a long snout because of this and this?
Well,
It's hard to get that same.
I did that today with you with
Yeah,
my
yeah,
random Metroid GIF that I
yeah, yeah. And
was
I
picking
love
on.
that. But it's like for me, it's like sometimes I'm like, "Oh, I don't want to bother people. What if they're busy?" And then it's like,
Yeah, I've noticed like
"What?"
I don't know whether sometimes it's forced down from
Mhm,
higher up or whatnot, but there's like an aversion to to talking to people and
mhm,
grabbing their time because their
mhm,
time's very important. And I get that that
mhm,
one sense the time's really important, but I also
mhm.
get that like that you could also maybe fix a lot of other problems if people solve them by coming to the table
Yeah.
together, right?
Yeah. Like I like doing that and I feel like it would like if I'd rather get like 1 minute of everyone's time versus like 15 minutes of my own time or
Yeah.
longer.
Yeah,
More efficient.
we're
Yeah.
not an island, right? It's like each person
Mhm.
isn't an island, and that's
Mhm.
like, and hopefully, I mean, I think the worst thing you're fighting as a game developer is trying to make, not to make something that feels like 15 islands, right? You want
Mhm.
it to
Mhm.
feel like one cohesive place. And to get there, you
Yeah.
need to be on kind of one path with it. So it's, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
You're leading my head in a lot of different places. Like my brain's like
Yeah. It's like
jumping.
everywhere.
It's
Yeah. But
conceptualizing.
I'm glad that you feel comfortable to just like poke me and just like be like, hey,
Well, we
which
worked together a
GIF?
long way, right?
20
So,
FPS or 15 FPS?
yeah,
I'm like, hmm.
yeah. Which one? Pick something. Sometimes you
Yeah.
just need, um,
That's second opinion.
yeah. Sometimes you need a second picking.
Mhm.
Second, you just want a gut feeling from people on things
Mhm.
too, right? Because it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of these weird things where it's like, and this is the reason I don't have a tattoo, is as an artist, and I know other artists that have lots of tattoos. So this is just me. This is my living as an artist perspective. I've never loved a piece of art long enough to want it on me. And even artists that I really admire, I look back 4 or 5 years later and I'm like, it's not, maybe it's technically very well done. It's not like but maybe I'm just not as in love with it as I was,
Mhm.
right? So it's like, because of that, I'm like, I don't know if I would want any of that. I definitely wouldn't want anything I've drawn on me because I'd get so sick of it, right? It's like,
Really? You don't want a wind tattoo like on your
it would
chest?
be like someone else's design of Win if I did. I had fun making that character. Actually, I had the most fun with the robots. You know me. My sketchbook
Mhm.
was so full of Bentley and Justin,
Yeah.
and that was
Yeah, you love Bentley.
Bentley was my
Yeah.
favorite. Though they
Mhm.
didn't go with his original storyline.
I want the cat thing, remember? That you
Oh yeah,
drew?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I want that in
The
there.
character that's in all of the concept
Yeah.
art, but not.
Everyone's been asking for it.
Yeah,
Everyone,
that's funny.
yeah.
And
Our
people are like,
players
"Why is this
demand.
character not in this game?" And I'm like, "Cause
Yeah, it's
I
like,
put him everywhere I could, and for some reason it wasn't queued up in any other process. I was happy to make him at any point in time, but
yeah, we
it's
should put
funny.
him in.
That's funny. And yeah,
Yeah.
the other materials were good enough that they didn't want to throw them out just because they had that character in them, and it's like, it's funny.
Everyone just loves that character, so
Which is funny. He's not in the game.
yeah,
It's like,
yeah. Not yet, anyways.
wow, yeah. I don't know. I'll see. I'll see. My time's usually pretty full. I don't know how I operate most of the time, so
Yeah.
anyways, yeah, it's like there's a lot of joys in game development. There's a lot of joys in like I think
Mhm.
you and I we both just want to make one of those experiences that resonate with players through one of these
Yeah,
axes, right? It's like whether
of
it's
course.
storytelling or world building or both, right? It's
Mhm.
like and being too overt. It was something I was going to bring up with you briefly was,
Mhm.
it's like if you get too fictitious with things, it can get annoying. It's like when I think
Mhm.
of Tales of Vesperia, which was a fun game, but the
Mhm.
dialogue was gibberish because of everything they made up. It was like the
Mhm.
Weasand of Cardos and the Duce of Nordopolica gathered together with the. And it's like, oh my gosh,
Skip,
shut up.
skip, skip.
This is like
Yeah.
all of these are nonsense words. Like, stop with the nonsense words and give me. And it was like if they would have been like, let's chase that squirrel, you'd be like, oh, thank goodness. In that game specifically. But some games have everything made up, and you don't really mind. You don't think about it the
Mhm.
same way. I guess it's just a cadence to how they invent names, or they're relatable enough to names that we know, or they create another language that you work around. I think it's kind of funny because I realized that a lot of the games that resonated with me in a very specific way all had fake languages, and I'm
Like
like,
Animal Crossing
no, that's a great fake language, but it's not what I'm thinking about. I was thinking about
or
like
The Sims.
Shadow of the Colossus and Ico. They
Hmm.
invented their own
Oh
language.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
Panzer Dragoon had its own language.
Hmm.
Nier and Nier Automata, they invented their own language for the music. You know, it's
Hmm.
like a lot of these games that kind of transcended typical games for me. They went so far in their world that they weren't giving us even the relief of our language to live it through, which is it's I guess it's a strange thing to even say, right? It's like because it's like watching Guardians of the Galaxy and then they're like flying in space and they just randomly come to this planet and they're all just talking. And you're like, huh? It's like, do you ever feel like games sometimes have to cover too much space, right?
Like in terms of like they have to do everything sort of
Well,
well,
well, no, it's like no
make it
physical.
believable, or
Okay, that is an argument we can have. That's a good conversation in itself. But I'm talking about covering too much physical space, and then they end up
Mm,
making a vast space exactly the same across the entire space, instead of focusing on something small and making sure it's unique. And I'm literally coming up on this in the fly. I got no planned points in any of this. But it's like, I think it's kind of interesting, even like we live in Canada, right? And you can
mm,
drive across Canada and we speak the same language. But, when
mhm,
we went to Gamescom and we were at the Netherlands and I was in the Netherlands and Germany, it's
mm,
crazy that like somewhere smaller than Ontario has like some of the tallest people in the world. And I felt short for the first time in my life when I was in the Netherlands. And then we literally crossed the border to Germany, and it was like 100 kilometers down the road. It was like going to Toronto, and now it was normal again. I was a normal height again, and I felt completely in place. And how was this tiny country isolated and culturally uniform enough for that? Right? It's like that seemed absurd to me, and it's like I feel like with games you kind of end up making some of the experiences, and it's like you can focus on something really narrow and pick out the details of it and make it very interesting. Sometimes the problem is we try to deal with too big of a space, too big of an area, and then we can't fixate on what makes it special, and then we make a
mm,
vast area and we try to make it look different everywhere, but it feels the same everywhere you go.
mhm. I see what you mean. Yeah, I think that's why it's important to also have like maybe certain themes or like pillars to like kind of drop back to keep the team aligned around these specific things that you want to really draw out in your game.
Yeah.
I know Colin will agree with
Yeah,
me
yeah.
on that.
Colin would definitely agree with you on that.
Colin and his themes,
Colin loves the
which we
themes.
should also talk about in another video
We definitely
with
talk about it in
Colin.
another video. I'm gonna
Yeah,
get Colin in. Colin will come and talk.
yeah,
I got a couple other
Colin
guests
special.
coming in the next couple weeks, hopefully, from
Ooh,
different studios. So
nice.
hopefully they are fun to talk to. I know one of them disagrees with me on several things, and that'll be fun.
Oh,
That'll be very
that'll
fun.
be. Who is it? Are you allowed to say or no?
Oh, it's my buddy Clay he works at
Oh,
Digital Extremes.
oh, okay.
Um,
I know. Yeah,
yeah. So,
nice.
anyways,
That'll
yeah.
be fun.
Yeah, it'll be fun. So it's yeah, I'm trying to mix it up. I'm trying to create a cadence, find a balance. I think I was when I made this podcast, I was just trying to fill a hole that I and maybe this hole is exacerbated by the lack of games conferences because I miss those conversations. I miss going to
Mhm.
games conferences and meeting game
Yeah,
developers and then talking to them about these kind of things. I really
yeah.
miss
I miss
that.
that a lot too.
And it's like and in my close knit group of friends, they
Mhm.
come to me as the expert on several fronts,
Mhm.
and that's great. But I want to grow by learning by people that blow my mind. That's what I want.
Mhm.
I want someone to say, "Hey, you're wrong about this. You're wrong about that." Right?
Mhm.
It's like when with COVID or whatnot, you're locked down to mostly your
Yeah.
closest tight knit
Mhm.
group of friends. But
Mhm. Mhm.
and that's
Yeah. Well, yeah. I don't think anyone's ever wrong about anything. It's just whatever works for you in your situation, I guess.
about anything.
Yeah.
What if someone thought
Well,
farts smelled good? Are they
hey,
wrong? Are they wrong,
maybe they do think
Jacqueline?
farts smell
Oh
good.
my goodness. Well, there's got to be some concrete right and wrongs.
Maybe. I don't know. I think everything is like in terms of grays for me.
Great. Everything is grace.
Oh, not everything, but like most things.
Okay.
Some things. Some things.
Some things.
I'm a very gray person.
You're.
I'm a very, yeah.
What am I to you? Am I a gray person?
I don't know.
You're trying to sort that out in your head right now. Um. I know you had a hard cutout on this time. Is there any last topics you want to talk about before we wrap up?
Um, no, I think we're good.
We're good.
I'm good, at least on my end.
Okay. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Jacqueline, for joining me. Hopefully, you had a
Thank
good
you for
time.
having
We'll have a
me.
three-way call on with you, me, and Colin and talk about the
Mm.
depths of theme and whether it's important with storytelling and where game development can go wrong on some of those fronts. And I guess defying pillars. Pillars, okay. That talk will be called Pillars. Should you tear them down or build them up stronger? That's what we'll
Oh,
call that talk. Something like that.
oh,
I'll word it
perfect.
even better before I do that. That was just on the fly. But anyways, thank you so much,
Perfect.
Jacqueline. You can say goodbye and then we'll head out.
Bye.
Take care. Thanks for. Anyways, oh, sorry.